Welcome to the Healthy Skin Show with Jennifer Fugo, where we're flipping everything you've been told about your chronic skin issues upside down and connecting you with alternative solutions your dermatologist never told you about.
Welcome back to episode number 294 of the Healthy Skin Show. Today's episode is what will be at least a 3-part series on dairy, which is highly controversial in the health and wellness world. And I'm often asked if dairy is bad for skin problems and other health issues. Now, if you had asked me this question about 4 or 5 years ago, my answer at the time would have been yes, dairy is inflammatory, so you should avoid it. But with time and my own relationship shifting with dairy, I have come to realize that the answer isn't so cut and dry. So it felt time to start sharing some of the information I've been exposed to in a way that will help you make a more informed choice without necessarily falling prey to fear or being swayed by the feel-good emotions to then buy products to do the right thing or reinforce the idea of being a good person. I don't like that the conversations around this are so black and white because they aren't. And I'm highly suspicious of articles that lack context and feel very much like persuasive sales pages. So if you're as curious as I have been about dairy and plant-based dairy, and whether the claims made about them are as clear-cut, you're in for a treat, especially since the pressures to reduce or remove dairy come from multiple fronts beyond just the wellness world. It's so demonized that some countries are hoping to reduce dairy farms as a mean to reduce greenhouse gases. In fact, an article in Reuters from May 3rd, 2023, which is just 3 weeks ago from this episode's release, called EU OKs 1.61 billion for Dutch government to buy out farmers, reduce nitrogen, demonstrates how governments may be compensating farmers who will willingly close down their farms, all in the pursuit of hitting targets to slow climate change. Now, whether we realize it or not, changes to agriculture are coming, mostly focused on reducing greenhouse gases to slow the warming of the planet. And part of this change will be pushed by governments, regulations, and laws. And it's also driven by consumers like you and I and our buying patterns. Specifically, you may have heard of the phrase, vote with your dollar. And if buying trends shift, that can and likely will impact this process. So we have to keep in mind that we are also inundated with marketing messages across media and social media platforms that range from emotional cries to, quote, do good for the planet and the animals, or claims that dairy is inflammatory and bad for you. And this is all before we dive into the question of whether animal dairy is a trigger for health or skin problems. It's commonly demonized for conditions such as eczema, psoriasis, and acne. With all of this, I'm regularly asked if dairy is bad for various skin and health problems, to which I typically reply, it depends. Because the truth is rarely black and white, nor does it often fit neatly into a 5-word slogan meant to make you feel good about how you're eating. And as I started to rethink my own relationship with dairy in mid-2022, sharing about my journey to start consuming dairy again was met with surprise and curiosity, as well as anger and disappointment from my community on Instagram. So I'm excited to have you join me on this dive into the question of dairy versus non-dairy milk. It's definitely an eye-opener. Now, before I dive into this topic too deeply, I want to share what could be my perceived biases about dairy right up front so you can factor that in as you listen. First of all, I absolutely love animals. I currently have 3 cats and would love to have chickens and ducks, but they aren't allowed where I live. And I am a true omnivore. I eat meat and plant foods. I also am an avid gardener, and I have 3 raised bed gardens, 5 fruit trees that include 1 apple tree, 2 different types of pears, an apricot tree and a fig tree, as well as a Concord grapevine and tons of herbs around my yard. I do not use any chemicals on my plants. I compost everything that I can in my unit and use the compost to enrich my garden beds. I also try my best to use rainwater in my gardens, and I'm actively working on a plan to make that more sustainable. I also support farmers who devote their lives to producing food, especially when they follow a more regenerative manner of farming. I do not have any IgE food allergies. And I also believe in the concept of eating as varied of a diet as possible. But I do not believe in telling people what the right way to eat is. My motto is truly, you do you. Only you can decide what diet is best for yourself, based on a variety of factors to support your best health. And I believe that consuming whole foods are a better alternative to processed foods. At the same time, I'm also a realist and understand the challenges that people face, including access to healthy whole foods, the cost, time available to cook, skills, though admittedly they can always be learned, allergies, etc. And yes, at the time of this episode's release, I currently consume dairy, including ice cream, cheese, butter, ghee, milk, though currently I'm consuming goat's milk. I was also dairy-free for almost a decade, to a varying degree over that period of time, after being influenced by plant-based documentaries and experts, as well as having gone through the plant-based nutrition certification program based on T. Colin Campbell's book, The China Study, back in my early 30s. This episode is brought to you by my line of professional-grade supplements called NutriQuel. I crafted these supplements especially for those struggling with chronic skin rash issues and based the formulations on my extensive research and clinical experience in my private practice. They are made from the highest quality ingredients and tested to be free of different allergens so that you can support your gut, liver, and overall health with the formulas that I've found work best for my Skin Rash Warrior clients without triggering a flare. I'm excited to share them with you, so check them out at quellshop.com and use the coupon code GET15OFF to get 15% off your first order. I'll put a link in the description below. And now let's jump back to the video. Now, with all of that said, I also believe the following. You should be allowed to decide what's best for you to eat based on your personal health information, and that includes IgE allergies, health conditions, and genetics, as well as facts rather than emotions, which we all know can be very easily manipulated. You've got to be incredibly careful about emotional manipulation around food and diet. Fear is an incredibly powerful motivator, as is wanting to feel like you're doing the right thing. And this is how so many in my community have ended up extremely confused about whether specific foods are a trigger or just flat out bad for their skin. And then the narrative that plant-based food alternatives are the way to save the planet should 100% be questioned. Asking questions is a good thing in my book and encourages us all to be a bit more thoughtful and intentional, rather than just blindly agreeing to something that turns out to not be what you thought it was in the first place. Becoming even more self-sufficient would probably help, even just growing a few herbs in a pot in a window, in terms of saving the planet, eating better, etc. And one last really important point that I think you should know up front. I'm not going to tell you what you should do, whether to consume animal dairy or plant-based dairy, nor will I judge you for whatever you decide to do. The choice of what's best for you is entirely up to you. Though it's certainly easier for me to just tell you what to do, I think that expectation, especially around more complex topics such as this, is how we've ended up so confused about what to eat. I also recognize that some listeners here have serious IgE allergies, which also must be factored into your personal equation. And this is where having all of these different dairy options is really great. The purpose of this conversation is to offer you the information that's taken me and my team months to research and collect. That being said, I do not claim to be an expert on this topic, and I'm sure we're probably missing things, but we've done our best. And lastly, I believe that if you're listening to this episode and to the Healthy Skin Show, you're an intelligent human being capable of making your own choices. And that's why I want to do my best to offer you the information with the hope that you'll sit with it all and choose what's best for you. Now that that's out of the way, I imagine you'd want to know how I ended up being dairy-free for so many years. I grew up like most kids in the 1980s drinking cow's milk. After leaving college in 2002, I wanted to start working out more consistently and began replacing dairy with soy milk and soy-based protein shakes, partly because every health expert at that time claimed that these processed soy alternatives were really good for you. By 2007, my health was struggling, and I had a ton of digestive issues, intense brain fog, fatigue so bad that I'd sleep through my alarm, and had started gaining weight despite my best efforts to keep it off. I was connected with a nutritionist who suggested IgG food sensitivity testing that indicated a moderate sensitivity to dairy and gluten, as well as a high sensitivity to eggs. So in January of 2008, I eliminated all three from my diet. The following year, I began taking holistic-minded nutrition classes and was encouraged to watch various documentaries about food that I realize now in hindsight were very biased and emotionally manipulative. I don't think any person watching animals being slaughtered and mistreated would gladly cheer on business practices that can appear and feel incredibly cruel and solely profit-driven. At that time, the choice presented was basically to stop buying and consuming dairy and meat, as farmers were generally all lumped together into what is sometimes called the animal industrial complex. I played around with plant-based meat alternatives, even trialed 2 weeks doing a balanced vegan diet, which, by the way, did not make me feel good, and consumed more coursework and read books that reinforced just how bad animal products, including dairy, were. It wasn't until I started my master's in human nutrition program in 2014 that I was introduced to different methods of farming through book assignments such as The Omnivore's Dilemma by Michael Pollan and Issues with Our Food System, like the book Safe Food by Marion Nestle, that I started to rethink my beliefs. I began reintroducing things like goat cheese and ghee here and there, but in terms of drinking any sort of milk, I still stuck with plant-based alternatives. And by 2021, I'd pretty much decided that cashew milk and oat milk had the best consistency and flavor, so that's mostly what I purchased. Now, in the summer of 2022, I bought an expensive yet small $20 jar of what was labeled as cashew milk concentrate, containing only one ingredient, which was cashews, that you could blend up with water in the blender to help cut back on buying all these products that are packaged in Tetra Pak cartons that are not recyclable. And I felt like I was making the right choice, the best choice that I possibly could. And it was such an easy and simple solution that also addressed my admittedly poor follow-through to make cashew milk with the bag of organic cashews in my freezer, which are still there to this day. It dawned on me after making this easy cashew milk a few times that I'd bought an inflated jar of cashew butter marketed as cashew milk concentrate, promoted by a wellness influencer on Instagram. And then one day I got curious as to how good for the planet cashew milk and cashew products actually were. And let's just say that I was horrified by what I learned, wondering how exactly cashew products could be called good for the planet, considering how much harm they inflict on workers. And I promise you more on that soon. Then I learned that some other plant-based products are associated with animal abuse due to how they are produced. There are issues of workers not being paid anywhere near a fair wage, the fossil fuels associated with transportation of these plant-based alternatives, some of which come from very far away. And then I looked at the water use, from water tables that sit beneath these fields, as well as glyphosate exposure. And to continue digging into this, I began to consider the nutrient density of these plant-based alternatives compared to animal dairy. And this was really inspired by some really smart colleagues who have gone through their own similar journey. And that's why I decided to give goat's milk a try, since it tends to be better tolerated than cow. And I fortunately don't have any food allergies, so I figured I didn't have much to lose. And though I was admittedly scared from years of conditioning that it was going to make me sick, I was completely fine. And I've also tried local grass-fed heavy cream from cow's milk, and it seems to be well tolerated as well, which is really nice because then I can go and visit the farms if I want and even return the glass bottles that it's sold in to be reused, just like back in the old days. Needless to say, I'm at a point where I am deeply questioning what the phrase "good for the planet" actually means when used by these plant-based companies to claim superiority over animal-based product competitors. What does this phrase mean? What metrics are we using to apply it? I certainly don't want to see the destruction of the environment, and I, and probably you, deeply value clean water, clean air, and all of the beauty and grandeur that is Mother Nature. But the deeper you dig, it becomes incredibly perplexing, especially around the question of workers. Does good for the planet not include the welfare and well-being of the workers involved? Does it not matter that many, though not all, good for the planet plant-based products may be sprayed full of glyphosate, which harms workers, the bees, and the ecosystem around it? This, my friends, are just a few of the questions I've been grappling with, and it's my goal in this series to help answer them as best I can with the knowledge available at this point in time. Like you, I'd prefer a simple, straightforward answer to whether dairy or plant-based milk is better. Earlier in 2022, many wellness creators started talking about how seed oils and oat milk were actually bad for you. I've seen countless videos on Instagram and TikTok that have millions of views pointing out what they describe as toxic or inflammatory ingredients in nutrition labels, or the high glycemic response triggered by oat milk. And despite pushing back at the oat milk industry with all of this negative attention, it's continued to grow and is estimated to be worth $7.8 billion by 2030. Now, if you know me, I'm not a fan of fear-mongering, and many of these creators know exactly what to do to generate viral content. And this strategy often includes making videos loaded with fear-triggering language and sometimes lacking concrete facts. Even people who generally eat pretty well have gotten to the point where they become terrified of ever coming in contact with a seed oil, as if even the tiniest of exposures is the worst thing in the world. And that's hard for me as a clinical nutritionist to see play out in real life, because these content creators don't end up dealing with the fear they seed. My fellow nutrition professionals and I do. We're the ones who are faced with having to essentially walk clients off the ledge because they start thinking that everything they eat is poison. And this is complicated within the community of those dealing with chronic skin issues, as they are further bombarded with elimination diets, sometimes specifically for a particular skin condition, that also reinforces a similar narrative. So the question of the seed oils found in many plant-based milks is an interesting one and really hits at the core of the concept: eat real food. I very much understand if particular IgE allergies require you to make different choices that are plant-based. For example, if you have a casein allergy or an egg allergy. But if we're really so concerned about eating good for you and good for the planet foods, wouldn't they ultimately be in their most simple forms? How are the inclusion of highly processed oils in the products inherently good for anyone's health? Another common additive called titanium dioxide has been used for years in many brands to make their plant milks look more white like cow's milk. And now California is looking to ban it in 2023 due to, quote, damage to our DNA and harm to the immune system, end quote. Plus, there are added flavors, stabilizers, gums, sweeteners, and other ingredients like added protein that increase nutrient value or help to create a mouthfeel or allow the product to sit longer on the shelf. But at the end of the day, I can't honestly tell you that commercially produced plant-based milks and dairy products are anywhere close to being what would be defined as real food, especially as how I would define real food, or in any form, whether it be plant or animal-based. It may not be practical to always eat real food, and I certainly don't, so no judgment there. But at one point in time, there was something to trying your best to eat foods that were as least processed as possible. And now that's changed to slogans like good for the planet and good for you. And I promise you that I'm not going to make some dramatic video of how poisonous seed oils are, as that majorly contributes to the rise in orthorexia. And I'm not going to say that I'll never consume anything with seed oils, as I think that's frankly pretty hard, especially if you're traveling. But being aware of them allows you to make conscious, strategic choices of what to potentially change and shift in your diet. So unless you're making a plant-based milk at home with water and a handful of whole food ingredients, it's laughable to describe plant-based dairy as anything other than inherently processed. And that is for most of the products on the market. Not all, but most. And another sign of processed food that I learned about in my integrative master's program was something called food fortification. You've probably seen orange juice with added calcium or cereals with added iron and some B vitamins. The World Health Organization defines food fortification as, quote, the practice of deliberately increasing the content of one or more micronutrients, which include vitamins and minerals, in a food or condiment to improve the nutritional quality of the food supply and provide a public health benefit with minimal risk to health, end quote. Fortification is sometimes used as a marketing tactic, as I might describe adding calcium to OJ so you feel better about drinking a big glass for you and your kids' bone health. Or it's because the food is so processed that the nutrients were lost and they had to add them back in, and then they advertise it to you as a good thing to cover how processed the actual food-like product is. Fortification can be helpful for at-risk populations to get extra nutrients in their diet, so I don't think it's 100% bad. But it also should be noted that fortification may not work as well as is generally assumed. That is the case for folic acid fortification in research, showing no significant decrease in issues like neural tube defects impacting a baby born from a mother with folate deficiency. Regardless, food fortification is generally a sign of a processed food product, especially if the list of ingredients is more than 2 or 3 items. To be fair, cow's milk dairy is often fortified with vitamin D, at least in the United States. And when you look then at the ingredients deck for many of the plant-based milks, it's no longer surprising, but almost expected to see added protein, B vitamins, especially B12, since it's a serious struggle to get sufficient B12 on a plant-based diet without supplementation, vitamin D, and other nutrients. So I do think that we should consider the level of fortification in plant-based dairy as another sign of how potentially nutritionally devoid these types of alternatives are. I'd guess that companies that produce more costly plant milks without nutrients added may do so because they know their consumer base is probably also taking supplements in addition to whatever they derive from their diet. Now, with this all said, I do hope that you keep an open mind about everything I've shared so far, because we have a lot more to dive into, and it can be easy to feel overwhelmed, especially when you have been exposed to years of information and experiences that run counter to questioning all of this. But at this point in time, I feel like it's better to ask questions so we can all make the most informed decisions possible that work best for each one of us. And I'm excited to have this conversation, and it's actually pretty crazy how much more I'm going to share with you. So here's the rundown. In part 2, I'm going to do a deep dive into the various different types of plant-based milk and animal milks, so you can understand different factors about them that might impact whether you want to use them moving forward or not. My criteria for each will consist of looking at various aspects, including farming methods, water consumption, pesticide exposure, harm to workers, as well as harm to animals and insects, sustainability, nutrition, worker pay, and more. And the goal is to help you decide what's really best, rather than being emotionally swayed by a company's creative marketing efforts that might not be entirely accurate. And then in part 3, we'll dive into what the research says on various chronic skin conditions and dairy. I think it's a very interesting and worthwhile conversation since so many believe that dairy is inherently inflammatory and bad for skin issues. So if you've got any questions or thoughts on what I've shared so far, you'd love to see the links and citations associated with this particular episode, you can head on over to skinterrupt.com/294 so we can keep the conversation going. And I would love it if you'd share any of your questions of things you'd hope I would cover in the next 2 episodes. Who knows, maybe it'll turn into a 4th as well, in the comments to this episode, because it is helpful for me to know what you want to know, what you want to be covered, because this is ultimately here to help educate you. And if you know someone who could benefit from this type of conversation about dairy, whether it be plant-based or animal-based, or whether it just triggers your skin condition, I think this is a great episode to share so that way we continue to support one another on our respective journeys, not only for our health, but also for that of our skin. And if you have found any of the episodes, including this one, of the Healthy Skin Show helpful for you, but haven't yet reviewed or rated the Healthy Skin Show on your podcast app, please make a point to head there, leave your review, rate the show, and make sure to hit that subscribe button. That way you never miss a weekly dose of new research, clinical tips and strategies, personal stories, nutritional ideas or concepts just like this, as well as inspiration that you need on your journey to rebuild healthy skin. And then let's connect over on Instagram. I'm at Jennifer Fugo. Thanks so much for tuning in, and I am so excited. We're going to dive deeper into this dairy topic in the next episode, which will be part 2. I'll see you then.